Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. This is episode 49, and I'm your host, Patrick McFarland. The show notes shall be found at libertyweekly.net/49, along with a video version of this podcast, which can be found on my YouTube page or embedded at libertyweekly.net. And today I have for you a conversation that I had in person with Trey of the Subversion Webcast. We recorded it this weekend. But for those who are privy to the Libertarian Union, Trey is the host of the Subversion Webcast, which may be found at www.subversionwebcast.com. And before we get into that conversation with Trey, I just wanted to make a few quick announcements here. One is that I just released my first full-length documentary of sorts, if you could call it that, entitled The Emerging American Police State. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you really should view the video version, which may be found on my website at libertyweekly.net, but also on the YouTube page. One major thing, I'm really stepping up my game, including with the email subscriber list and with all my social media presence. But the main cornerstone of that is going to be the Liberty Daily vlog series, in which case I'm going to try and get out vlogs almost every single day, just short little, hopefully under 5, but definitely under 10-minute vlogs about different topics that are piquing my interest at the time. And I think that it will really help engagement and help drive subscribers to the podcast. I've already seen some pretty good success in the first 2 days. So I would definitely check that out. And it's very important to subscribe to the YouTube feed because the daily vlogs will not be part of the Liberty Weekly podcast. So you can't get them on the iTunes feed or anything like that. So definitely connect with me on YouTube or BitChute. I'm also on Steemit, Minds, and Twitter. All those platforms I've been really pushing in the last little bit. So I really appreciate that. And I'd like to make another call on the audience to keep sharing the show, share my documentaries like The Emerging American Police State, and to share the Liberty Weekly podcast as well as the Subversion Webcast, which I think you'll appreciate a lot of the things that Trey has to say in this interview. So, without further ado, here it is. Thanks, everyone, for watching. All right, so this is the first official meeting of any Libertarian Union podcasting members because Trey and I live in the same city pretty much.
Practically.
If you could call Eden Prairie the same city as St. Paul.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the same metro area.
Yeah.
If it's within a 45-minute drive, it's kind of the metro area.
Yeah.
And if you actually know about the geography of the place, Hennepin County goes all the way up to kind of way northwest. I can't.
Oh, really?
Rogers, all the way up to Rogers. So anyway,
damn. Yeah.
Inside baseball for Twin Cityans.
Yeah. I don't know how many people in the cities listen to my show. Did you get a local audience from what you were doing?
I think I did. A lot of them dropped off when I started getting more edgy, but but yeah, I mean, there are still a lot of people that listen, especially there was a hip hop production company that I think a lot of those guys still listen. I interviewed a lot of them. I think they appreciate my take. And that's maybe the good thing about shifting from music to libertarianism like I did. I kind of pulled in the audience and let these sort of built up a relationship with people who maybe wouldn't be prone to my ideological predilections, and then sort of just open them up to me, personally. And now they see that that I'm a hardcore propertarian.
Yeah.
So at least maybe it softens that sort of edge that people have, because I think a lot of people just view libertarians as dispassionate or like they don't care about issues, and I don't think that's true. And I get this impression from you that that you're kind of sympathetic to a lot of it, like I might be a little sympathetic to some of the critiques that progressivism makes. Maybe I don't know. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I grew up as a conservative, as a classical liberal type, founding fathers worship, Yeah. And I've kind of, so I listened to Prof. CJ's Revolutionary War talk on the drive down to Utah.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of, rethought my founding fathers worship a little bit. But
sure.
Yeah, I have, I don't know if it's been 7 years because I've been in the cities for 7 years now. And I have a lot of progressive friends, obviously, as I'm sure that you do.
Oh man, you can't get away from it here. This is a very progressive city.
Yeah, real bad.
Which there's a good element to it, Like it is kind of cool to talk to, like, there's a lot of Somalians and Ethiopians that you'll just run into downtown. It's kind of interesting just to talk to them because even though, I don't know, this is such a controversial subject among libertarians, just the culture issue. You know, they come from a place that wasn't imbued with the Enlightenment values quite yet. So that's the whole point of contention. But if you talk to them, they're just normal people too. And it's interesting. There's a lot of agreement among people who have been victims of the aggression of America, who understand that the sectarian conflict has to do with this intervention. So if you just subtly ask them, like, "Hey, where'd you come from?" and what's your experience with how your country has been destabilized, it's just, when you get their firsthand story, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, I think because so I used to be a bordertarian.
Yeah, and I still waver on that. Actually, I'm a complicated. My views are a little complicated. Like, and it comes down to which areas of the state do you want to eliminate first? I think is the question. But I think on principle, yeah, I'm an open borders guy still myself, because I don't think anyone, like, if a guy in Texas wants to hire Mexicans to pick his strawberries, that's a market function. I have no say over that. That's his property right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, I don't think culture is an excuse to stop immigration. But unfortunately, where my mind starts to waver on this is like the security problem, because I think I still have a little bit of, that statist impulse in me to be like, well, we've caused this problem and destabilized these places, and a lot of people in the world hate us for it, which is true. Yeah, I'm convinced from just read Al Qaeda's statements. Man, they hate us because of the things that we've done to people in the Middle East. So it's like, so there's truth to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think you have, in my mind at least, I separate my ideal from the strategy that I'd like to see put in place.
Okay.
But unfortunately, libertarians are irrelevant, kind of.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, I hate to like put it that way, and it sounds so dismal, but I mean, man, and to become relevant, I'm convinced that we do need to champion the big things, what the state is, and just the worst things that it does, the police state and the war state. So if we can focus on that, we might make ourselves more relevant instead of just being the middle of the road centrist option that people have, because that's all Gary Johnson was. Yeah,
and I think that's how people view libertarians. But when it comes to the borders issue, I think I was convinced by Jerry when he said, do what you can now. Anything you can do to reduce the size and scope of government, do it. And I guess you could make a roundabout argument that, well, bringing mass influxes of people in would eventually increase government or something like that. But I feel like we know what the problems are. We know what causes mass immigration. Yeah. So why fight the effects of mass immigration instead of fighting the problems? And the problems are, the war state, the war on drugs, and this market influx, this distortion in the natural market of people self-selecting to come to America instead of people being displaced and imported. I mean, the globalists, they want this massive influx of people.
Sure.
And at the same time, they want us to close the borders, and they're bringing these people in and causing, the situations for these people to come in. And they're counting on the fact that it will cause division amongst us.
Yeah.
The us versus them. So I think that by being bordertarians, then you're playing into the globalist divide and conquer game, when what we should just be doing is focusing on, okay, what's causing these people to come? Well, we know that,
Yeah.
We know what it is.
And that's the controversy, I think, among libertarian groups specifically is, I mean, you'll even find, especially people who are more on the conservative side, they'll be like, oh no, look at what the Ayatollah said in 1988. They're trying to have a cultural insurgency into America and usher in this global Islamic order. Well, if you look at some statements from clergymen in the Catholic Church, you'll find the same sort of missionary statements that they'll make. So, I mean, there's no religion that doesn't try to spread itself. That's what religions do, just like that's what states do.
Yeah.
Like they are designed to spread. And, it's sort of interesting where that merger of state and religion sort of meets in those gray areas, because the Catholic Church was the original state, right? So you can see a lot of the historical patterns that religions went through, and you could kind of maybe even observe it on what states are doing, because the state has become the new religion, I'm convinced, for a majority of people, because we can't, in America specifically, we can't all rally around one religion, because it's sort of baked into the cultural milieu now, is that we have to be sort of open and accepting of this like equitable view of different cultures and different religions, which so yeah, I mean, we don't have this unifying force of religion, but we have the unifying force of America, like the whole nationalism thing. So yeah, I guess I'm just kind of curious to see like the change during Martin Luther's time with the printing press and how that subverted the Catholic Church. What technology and what social apparatuses are going to be used to do that to the state? And that kind of, just to get around to the topic of subversion, that's what the show is sort of about, is just in a really tactful way to undermine the propaganda machine in and of itself. And it starts with media. I mean, what we're doing by creating content, I think, is more than we could ever do within the political realm.
Yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
or else I guess I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. But
right. And I mean, we could probably spend time in our the Minnesota Libertarian Party and try to do something, but I'm not even convinced that those people are really as hardcore libertarians as us, and I'm not sure that we have the same goals.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it seems like libertarian has become a nebulous thing, because the word itself kind of is. I mean, it just means the antithesis of state power. Mm-hmm. So it even started as like it's like a word coined by like a French leftist during the French Revolution. The word that they use translates to becoming libertarian in the sense that we use it in English. That doesn't necessarily mean that libertarianism writ large is like a leftist ideology.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that the version of libertarianism that I'm sympathetic to is pro-capitalist, is kind of right wing. And I'm kind of curious. I heard you say on recently, I don't know if it was the Libertarian Roundtable that we did, but you said something about how you viewed yourself as more of a centrist libertarian.
Yeah.
So, and I say that sometimes too, especially to people who are super left, and I just want to like at least not make them off put by being like, I'm a staunch pro-capitalist, anti-communist kind of person, which is true.
Yeah. Same here.
But at the same time, I think if I can at least let people's guards down, I could get a point across to them that I'm not their enemy. And you said something really potent earlier. You said they just the people who are shaping public opinion can very easily, through propaganda, just make us all fight with each other and divert from what the true enemy is, which is the state.
Yeah.
I think net neutrality is a really good example of that. Net neutrality it created a partisan conflict over something that was a war between two major corporate powers trying to fight the government for which entity was going to subsidize the other, essentially. And I'm not convinced that repealing net neutrality necessarily makes, it's not the unequal power shift that the Title II legislation was. But if you look at the money that was being funneled through the propaganda campaigns on both sides, the pro-net neutrality was from major commercial consumers of bandwidth, being Netflix and Google and Facebook and all those. And of course, for obvious reasons, the ISPs were on the other side because they don't want their infrastructure to just be completely under the purview of the state, and more specifically of Google and Facebook and Netflix.
Yeah.
So I don't know, how much do you know about the actual science there? I'd like to get into net neutrality if we could.
Yeah, no, I know next to nothing about it, honestly. I think, but when it comes to that kind of stuff, I see a false dichotomy.
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
think and that's what it is. Either you focus on, we could either have it one way or the other, and it's the difference between a giant douche and a turd sandwich, like South Park,
Right.
And it's yeah. So I know next to nothing about it, but I'm not. Well, and you mentioned the Gutenberg printing press analogy with the internet, and Dave Smith had a really good net neutrality episode on it, and
he's been really great on it.
Oh yeah, I have recently started listening to more Dave Smith, and I love him because I think he's the voice to the everyman. He's, I think, in our movement, and he's articulate, but he also gets down on the level of someone who, doesn't concern themselves 100% with these questions.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure he's won a lot of converts.
I think so. Yeah. But yeah, to get back to the net neutrality thing, I think he made some good arguments, but one thing I always get on is that the liberals want the FCC to regulate the internet. Like,
right.
It's such a circus, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago that the left hated the FCC for, whatever reason, for censoring left-leaning causes, such as just, people used to hate the FCC just for being super pedantic about what you could say on TV at a certain time of day. You know what I mean? Like, who came up with that rule? That you could only say shit after 10 p.m. Like, that's not something that needs to be decided by the state.
Yeah.
I mean, if the state's going to do anything, that's not one of the things, right?
Uh-huh.
And of course, we obviously would say the state is legitimate for no service, but but at least to the constitutionalists or the minarchists, you could at least be like, hey, if they're going to do anything, not this thing.
Well, okay. And this, actually, I wanted to talk about this funny story that I got into last night that you just reminded me of, is this just the arrogance of some people wanting to regulate something that they know nothing about.
Oh, sure.
And we had to get my truck and the cats from my sister's place. So we were driving and we stopped in Hudson at Applebee's, and there was this woman who this couple from California or something with their kid, and some drunk next to us kind of struck up a conversation with them. When you're sitting in the bar and there's that one guy, and they got to talking about, he said something about, welcome to Wisconsin, like kids can drink at any age with their parents or whatever. And then the California people brought up like, I heard there's no like restriction on hunting, because that's a big issue right now.
Especially in California, right? I mean, hunting's always... Yeah, like it's hard to get tags in California, despite the fact that there's invasive species there.
Oh yeah, well, and she was, because there is a law in Wisconsin now that there's no restriction on the age of hunting. Like an 8-year-old can shoot a deer if their parents are present and say it's okay.
Was that a recent thing?
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And yeah, exactly. And this couple from California was like whining about it, and my hero from across the bar was like, hey, I grew up here, back in the day we didn't have hunter safety, we didn't have any restrictions, and we didn't kill each other, so fuck you. And and they left, and I was like smiling to my wife, and this California lady is like, I think that guy was mad at me or irritated with me. And she was like, I've never hunted a day in my life. And it's like, well, why are you trying to fucking tell people what to do?
Right.
You've never picked up a gun. You've never shot a deer before.
Yeah, you don't even know.
Yeah. But
I'm not even necessarily, it's not like I'm against gun safety or anything like that. I think it's the responsibility of a gun owner and especially of the parents who's raising a gun owning child to be extremely careful with that thing, because it's an extremely deadly tool. With technology, there is a great responsibility with that, and guns are the most transformative technology. I think even more formative than the internet, maybe, because it changed the entire way that humans solved conflicts and got food. So, I mean, it's a huge thing that's never going to go away in America. I think we have to come to terms with that.
I hope it doesn't. Yeah.
And people try all the time. I mean, you'll see people on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen this, but you'll see people from over the pond say like,
oh, well, you guys just have a gun culture. That's your problem. It's like, well, understand why. It's because your country invaded ours and were asserting their dominance, and we pushed you back with guns, and we decided that we never want to give that up.
Yeah.
Because we pushed back your empire.
Yeah.
You know? And fuck the people who say that people with AKs aren't going to stop a government.
Yeah.
Just look at Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean the example
Tribesmen.
right there. And freaking Vietnam, you know, and all that shit. And yeah,
all kinds of examples you can see all throughout the world.
Yeah. Equalizing the playing field. But well, and when you talk about the Gutenberg printing press, because I wanted to get to that, and I want to get back to centrist libertarianism too. So don't let me forget. But I think we are just starting to see the ability of the internet to level the playing field. And I think a lot of people in dissident movements, I know Corbett has talked, I'm a Corbett fanboy, I guess you could, because he's one of my main like influences to my subject matter and my presentation. But just this idea that he touches on and other people touch on, I think is so important, of people participating in the conversation and people having their own media and people producing their own media and getting out of that narrative. I mean, we are working towards a decentralized, and Prof. CJ talked about this on, you know, the American Revolution, how it was actually, you get a grassroots decentralized belief in natural rights. And he was talking about, you know, actually it started, and preachers were having this fire and brimstone, natural rights bestowed from God. But if we can get that same element to it, you know, this grassroots decentralized media, and I really hope that, because in this documentary that I've been working on for the past couple of days has focused on the smart grid and the command and control grid and the surveillance state. Well, I think the hope is that I hope that free market innovation will always outpace the state. And I worry about that because the state is so fascistic and in bed now with private entities.
Right.
And those lines they've always been blurred, but now it's even more tough to distinguish where the lines end, even in the grayness between them. So yeah. And you know, going back to the whole net neutrality thing, I mean, you said earlier that, you know, people don't even know how this stuff works. So let me just kind of give a little bit of a crash course. Broadband is a spectrum of frequencies using really low amounts of current to transmit information. What stops your Netflix video from being disrupted by the signal from an email is it being transmitted at different frequencies. So there's this huge range of frequencies and bandwidth. And even though there's a lot of it there, I think you understand this economic concept of scarcity, right?
Yeah.
Just because there's a lot of something doesn't mean that it's not scarce. There's going to be scarcity of bandwidth where there are bottlenecks in the system, because basically the repeaters and the relays and whatnot that are on a network have a finite amount of current that they can put through them at these specific frequencies. So what happens with the whole net neutrality thing, Netflix has to have dedicated ports through the broadband network in order to deliver their information at a certain speed. So to do that, they have to pay the ISPs money to route around all of their infrastructure and have this dedicated port just for Netflix, which is fine. It just costs a little bit of extra money.
Yeah.
And even Netflix was really innovative in this. They actually decided to work with ISPs and had them put hard drives in the little circuit boxes. And actually, a lot of times when you're streaming your Netflix, it's coming from a hard drive locally placed on a junction box somewhere.
Really?
Yeah. So
Wow.
this is the way the market is able to deliver things at a lower cost and higher efficiency. We should let that process play out. The price structure has to work. But Netflix didn't want to raise their rates on their customers, so they just wanted ISPs to do it for them. They wanted to put the burden on ISPs to make them improve the infrastructure, you know, not dependent on exactly how much demand Netflix was putting on them. And, you know, I'm saying Netflix, but that's really just an allegory for large commercial consumers of bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially that's what it is Netflix was trying to nationalize ISPs for their own benefit.
Okay.
So basically the basic science and what people, especially proponents of net neutrality, don't even know about this, that the
basic principle is that bandwidth is scarce and you will have bottlenecks if price structures aren't allowed to correct for those problems with the delivery of that service. So, and you get that in every facet. I mean, being extremely anti-war as I am, because the domestic stuff and the economic stuff, that's really, it's super important to me. Don't get me wrong, but the war stuff is really what's important to me. And what can really piss me off is when people talk about these things as if they know, and they think they know. They get that information. They get bad information from the news sources that they trust, and it's kind of on them for not going anywhere else to check the sources. But just a huge example: anytime that Yemen has came up recently, all they talk about is Iranian-backed Houthis, which isn't necessarily true. When, say, for example, just because Spain is particularly a Catholic country, right? So just because Spain wants a certain policy or anything like that, does that mean that every Catholic in the world is aligned with Spain?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Yeah,
and it's really complicated because the borders are really close in the Middle East, and that gets into another problem is the Western drawn lines after World War I. But before I get too tangential here, basically what I'm trying to get at is that Iran actually told the Houthis not to take the capital of Sana'a in 2014. They said that you shouldn't do that because the Saudis are going to get pissed. So they advised against it because they don't want to deal with Saudi aggression themselves. So there's no indication that the Houthis are backed by Iran. All they have is evidence of
these rockets
of rockets, yes, that were retrofitted from Soviet era missiles. So basically what they're doing is they're taking scraps and putting them together. That's not, Iran
not the
trading
gun.
Yeah. That's stuff from the Cold War. And you see this shit all the time. The missiles left over from the Cold War are always an excuse to go over there and fuck with the place. Same with Iraq. Now, if you ask anyone what was the concern with Iraq, and a lot of them will tell you, well, it's weapons of mass destruction. Push them on that. Ask them, what are the weapons of mass destruction? Most people will tell you it was nuclear weapons. That's not what the intelligence professionals were saying. The worry was chemical weapons.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, they have the excuse. The New York Times came out with an article that said that essentially we found these chemical weapons that I don't remember if it was sarin or exactly what the material was that was in them.
And it was 2 jugs of Clorox.
Probably. It probably, stored in the same warehouse as some new chemicals or so it makes it look like they're doing something shady. But no, essentially it comes down to those chemical weapons couldn't be moved because they're more dangerous to try to get rid of than it's worth. So it's like, but we knew about this. We knew that those were Reagan's missiles Reagan let Iraq have those missiles during the Cold War, because if you understand the whole history between Reagan and the Ba'athist regime in Iraq, they were letting a lot of things slide just to check Iranian power at that time. So anyway, we knew about that, essentially, is all I'm saying. And it had nothing to do with weapons that they were planning to use in any sort of immediate future. So, so if you just point out to people exactly the propaganda that was wrong, what really makes me sick is the people that know about this and they're still establishment mouthpiece tools. So, and I stop. Like, I'm usually pretty cordial. I'm usually pretty nice, but I can't be nice about the war state. I can't be nice about it because mass murder is really important to me. I recently just got really pissed at people about Ben Shapiro because a lot of libertarians shill out for Ben Shapiro. Now, yeah, he says some nice things. He's got some good quotes. Won't deny that at all. However, the problem is that when he gets to Iran and when he gets to the Middle East, he's completely blinded. And I kind of don't care about the rest of the things that he says that are nice because they're low-hanging fruit. All he does is trash leftists, and they're really inept. The inept kind of leftists.
Yeah.
The college campus leftists that they kind of have power within the establishment and within Hollywood. And I understand that that's an important thing. However, put on balance, who's the real aggressor? It's the police and the military.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, if you're supportive of any kind of large police presence in America to solve broken, to use broken window policing as a method, and Shapiro seems to not be against that, and he seems to not be against being hawkish on Iran and their allies. And what's really important is I don't think people realize where Russia plays into all this. This is all in the Middle East right now. It's all just this like looming, like the Cold War kind of never ended in the Middle East. Like Russia is not called the USSR anymore, but that's still the balance of power.
Yeah.
Between these previously communist powers who have, both sides are now trying to find a balance between what's the best mercantilist policy and how do we check power against each other.
I really think that's what, we're just a mercantilistic, fascistic kind of state. But yeah, I totally get you when you say, because I mean, those are the biggest issues. What are the biggest issues? Well, the war state, because that's when the state comes into its own, and that's when the biggest driver of disposing of our liberties, if you talk about the police state too, it's all cyclical because they test all this equipment abroad, the surveillance equipment, and my documentary kind of deals with this about the Stingray equipment and how they're mounting it.
I was kind of wondering if you got into that.
Oh, yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm hoping it turns out well because it's like an hour and 30 minutes long or something. But the Stingray equipment and the drones that they've tested out in Iraq, and there's actually, the film is from a filmmaker in Minneapolis who found out that they're using Stingray equipment and they used it at the protests.
Oh, wow.
They have the FBI has attached the Stingray equipment to domestic planes that are doing surveillance missions across big cities in the U.S. So when it comes to the warfare state, I've gotten so, maybe it's because during the peak of this campus craze, I was in Yale at the U of M.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess I don't really think about that either. I kind of brush off the college campus thing because it doesn't affect me. I went to a community college, so I didn't really see much of that. I mean, it was there. Yeah. There were the crazy college lefties, the Antifa types, but I guess they were just really, they didn't disrupt my day ever. I guess just to me, I don't see it. But I'm privileged in that I didn't have to deal with the university. So anyway, keep going though.
Well, I just don't care about it anymore. You know, I lived it. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it.
It's the wrong battle. The culture war is such a distraction.
Yeah, it is a distraction, I think. And it's the divide and conquer narrative. And I see a lot of my conservative family kind of jumping on they really like, Steven Crowder, and there's a place,
right.
There's a place for that, but he did this crank call where he was calling Target and complaining about the transgender bathrooms, and I'm like, I don't give I don't care about, the state shouldn't dictate that, but when it comes to the campus situation, I just don't care, man. In the free speech stuff, you have free speech on your own property, and it's just, it's not important to me as the war state is, or the police state issue.
Yeah, and I get into spats with libertarians about this all the time. I'll say free speech absolutism is kind of bullshit.
Yeah, it is.
I should be able to kick someone off my property for saying something I don't like, and no one has anything else to say about that. As far as I'm concerned, if someone's talking shit to my wife or more accurately, my girlfriend. Yeah. But if someone is being a nasty person, I should be able to kick them off my property. No explanation needed. I don't need an excuse. No. And it doesn't compromise my principles as a libertarian to do so.
No.
But you get these thick libertarians that think that that's how you have to live your life. Otherwise, you're not living this pure, principled life. So, and that's the problem with libertarians is we end up fighting more about petty infighting squabbles.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I love it at the same time. I must love it because I do it all the time. I fight with other libertarians all the time because I want us to be right about things. And that's important. Going back to the Shapiro thing is I just don't find him to be an ally, and a lot of people do. And I just don't think that anyone who supports American aggression can be considered an ally. I mean, the same thing could be true with lefties who maybe they're good on the wars, which is the most important issue to me. But man, if you believe in fascistic economics, which a lot of social democrats who think they're socialists, that they really are just fascists. They really just want the state to control it under a national purview, because you ask them, how far should we go with welfare? Do you think that we should supply welfare to Ethiopian kids in the western part of Ethiopia? Probably not.
Yeah.
You probably don't think we have enough money for that, do you? And every once in a while, you'll get a consistent leftist who thinks that that's what we need to do. But then it's pretty easy to get to them and be like, the numbers don't work out, buddy. We'd all be in poverty if we're going to try to be equitable about the aid that we have throughout the world. And it would only make the problem worse. Like what's happening in Malawi right now. They're dependent on aid since like the 60s.
Yeah.
Like they've just been disrupted. And, we know about Austrian economics. If you create incentives, you kill the incentive for people to produce for themselves, which actually to me seems like a leftist should be receptive to Austrian economics. I kind of don't get that. Like, why don't they understand that making people dependent on some like bigger force, it doesn't make them productive. It only makes them vulnerable to people who want to quote unquote exploit their labor. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I just don't see why, we're just all so divided, and I don't know. It's just such a hard thing to deal with, because I can't stand leftists just in general, right down to the basic philosophy. But I just don't see how they don't, they just it's hard to get concessions out of them about things that seem like they should care about and agree with you on.
Yeah.
And I mean, even basic economic things. So,
like dependence is exploitative. And
exactly.
Yeah,
Why don't they get that?
Yeah. I've gotten frustrated, and I don't, oddly enough, I do talk a lot, and I talk a lot at my family, but my friends that I know, I have stopped completely talking to them about politics, or trying to. If it comes up, I'll say something, and I think the moment was where I have a really good friend in law school, and he's a Bernieite kind of, and he's a very smart person, so don't get me wrong on that, but Boldface was talking to him about the genocide in Yemen and, all the shit that we're doing in the Middle East. And he really thinks, I think, that Donald Trump being racist is more important, because this is at home and we need to worry about, what's happening here. And he thinks that it is time. He's fed up to the point where he thinks violence is necessary now. And when the Berkeley, or not Berkeley, the Charlottesville thing happened, mm-hmm. He was all like, oh, well, these people, we need to get out and punch them in the face, and, it's time. And I don't understand how they could not care about us literally committing genocide
on brown people.
Yeah, no less.
I'm sure there's some gay ones and some trans ones in there too.
Yeah, so you freaking should care about that. But boldface, No, I think it's more important that we figure out, because Donald Trump is racist, because CNN told me so. Yeah,
and in my experience, I've had better luck with Bernie Sanders supporters than I have. I've gotten more concessions out of those kind of people than I have like my progressive aunt who loves Hillary Clinton. Like I can't even get her to say that invading Kosovo was a bad idea when Bill Clinton was in. You know what I mean? So it's like I don't know. There are so many people in my family too that are super progressive. Even the cops in my family, they're progressive too.
Yeah.
That's why I just say I think everyone's progressive, and a lot of them don't even know it. Because if you ask a conservative, what shouldn't the government provide? Because they want the government to provide school, they want the government to provide roads and national security. So what is it that they don't want the government to provide?
They're all fucking socialists. They're all.
I know.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's just where it gets down to definitions too. And you'll argue with people for days on just the definition of socialism.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm not buying the shit that true socialism is when workers own the means of production. Because as far as I can tell, the only kind of like writ large socialism that would work even on paper would be one that has to have a ruling bureaucratic class.
Yeah.
In which workers obviously don't have total control. Now, if you get a consistent leftist on this, they'll tell you that, oh, well, the structure of production has to include a democratic apparatus in order to, you can vote in what, vote on all these things that you're doing.
So you want an oligarchy.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's run by unions is what they want. But I think I remember hearing a story about in Lithuania. They have these people that they'll have meetings like 3 times a week on just like what they're going to do with bureaucratic or sort of financial matters within the company. But I don't think people realize that that's what the office people are doing all day when you're out like working and producing things, right?
Yeah.
So people who get to go home at 3:30 every day, they don't have to sit and vote on things that they're not qualified to even make decisions on. And this is the huge thing where I don't really agree. If you're in the libertarian milieu, you'll know that there are all these little factions of different libertarians. And I'm not one of these people that says, and it kind of bugs me, this is probably the thick part of me coming out, but I just don't think that it's useful, and I think it's a disservice to say that libertarianism is only anarcho-capitalism. I think that is a reduction of what the reality of the history of being anti-state. So anyway, I only agree with the anarcho-capitalists, but there are these other people, agorists and more like of legitimate like centrist, if we're looking at the traditional political spectrum, the people who are more like into Max Stirner and counter economics and things like that. Well, a lot of them are even against just like the management class in a firm, and I don't know. These are people who supposedly understand Austrian economics and like Austrian economics, but I just don't understand why leftists are so anti-management. But yeah, anyway, I think we're getting way too far into just like bashing the left and critiquing the left when there's a lot more.
There's a lot to go around.
There's a lot of important things that we could miss, and that's where I kind of get frustrated sometimes.
Yeah.
But anyway, did you want to get back to, since we're on this subject of centrist libertarianism, do you want to get back to a point that you wanted to make?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to kind of describe the point I'm at right now, because should name names when it comes to libertarian drama. Is that all right?
I don't care. Okay. I mean, that's the world we're in, so we might as well speak openly about it.
Well, okay, so the most recent Twitter drama was between kind of Tom Woods and my friend Mike Hostel, who runs the Front Range Voluntary.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay, go ahead.
It was also between Mance Raider and Liberty Hangout, and Liberty Hangout was involved with Tom Woods, and Tom Woods kind of endorsed Liberty Hangout.
Well, yeah, he was. It seemed like he was to me too.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't like you couldn't come right out and say that he was endorsing them, but he was like, well, these aren't the bad guys. These aren't the guys we need to look out for. But I guess from my perspective and what I tweeted back as a reply to Tom was, well, hey, can't you understand how, you have people in this movement who are considering themselves libertarian who are, waver on some really important things and even are just like diehard Trump supporters. So, I mean, at some point you just got to kind of call them out and be like, hey, dude, you're not a libertarian. You're a conservative. And that's okay. You can be a conservative, but just don't call yourself a libertarian,
Well, I know that the infighting is necessary. I think it's a part of libertarianism. It will always be
but it's exhausting.
It is. And I don't know if it's counterproductive. It is a little bit, but I got down because Mike Hostel's a friend of mine.
Yeah. And he was being a little too crazy with it. I mean, him and Mance get a little bit too, thick for my liking. Which
thick on the left.
Yeah, and I really don't have any place to talk because I have those things too. But I mean, I just think at some point, I don't know if it's Tom Woods, man, I'd probably just leave him alone because we all know that he's like kind of wavering between the paleo libertarian and the, and I don't think I don't think I'm making a risk by saying that. Like he obviously has and I have no problem with it. I listen to his show every day. I get a tremendous amount of benefit from Tom Woods. I've probably learned more from him than I have any other single libertarian.
Oh yeah, same
here. I was introduced to extremely important people like Stefan Kinsella, who has really come to shape a lot of the way that I see just libertarian thought and how I see property rights. And Hoppe too.
I'm not
even
an
for
anti-Hoppe type.
No, me either. And it's refreshing to see someone who is also maybe sympathetic to some of the things that I talk about, like history of racism in America. I'm totally fine with talking about that, and I hate that right libertarian, the tendency to be a right libertarian comes out, and you want to avoid those subjects because you want to avoid virtue signaling. But in my mind, I think it's worthy of talking about. However, basically, the long end, the short of it is, I think, as I was saying earlier, I just take all the little bits and pieces that I find useful of anything that I observe and anything I can learn from. And Hoppe and Kinsella and Woods, I learn a lot from them. So because he says something mean about gay people and how they have high time preference behavior, I mean, I don't endorse that view, but at the same time, it's not like a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, it doesn't get rid of all the awesome things that Hoppe says.
And you can say that that's wrong about what he says, and even though I don't really make a big deal out of it because it's not going to get you anywhere with other libertarians. You're just going to fight about it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like you said, there's value in the infighting. So.
But it was depressing at the same time because like I said, Mike is my friend. He just published one of my law school papers about free market alternatives to domestic violence policy.
Interesting.
And I mean that, and I think he had a point too, and let's critique the right maybe a little, but he was talking about how the anti-communist thing can be a slippery slope to fascism. Because
it turns into a reactionary movement pretty quickly. It
does. And I think I think that's what initiated it, is that Tom called them out and said, well, what about this anti-communist group that was Jewish and non-fascist or something? And I'm like, well, that doesn't get rid of the John Birch Society,
right?
And the
maybe they're both
McCarthyism.
Good. Maybe they're both good things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good to have anti-communists and anti-fascists out there if they're truly,
if they would be
if they're actually principled
and
things like that.
But and then there's this thing about IQ, and I think it's just, and Tom kind of, and I'm not attacking Tom. I really like Tom, and all that stuff. But the way he slapped down Mike, who was a supporter of his, and then got into like an IQ dick measuring contest.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. It got this deep.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a couple tweets about, endorsing libertarian or Liberty Hangout.
Well, and if I'm wrong, then I apologize, but
I didn't follow it. Like, you're obviously close to this Mike Hossel guy. So
I'm not
I was just an observer.
I'm not that close. Like we chat. Or we have chatted, but I just don't understand this obsession with IQ, because you can have a high IQ and be a fucking idiot, like Albert Einstein being a socialist.
Yeah, Sam Harris is super smart, but that dude is pro-interventionism, and I don't see how someone can be that smart
and that dumb.
Yeah,
but this IQ thing is just like like I said, intellectual dick measuring, and it's like, okay, yeah, right, and then when it just comes to it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the infighting brings out the worst on both sides.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I respect both sides.
Yep.
And that's why I guess I consider myself a centrist, because there's a difference. I have my own preferences. I'm a conservative. I like my value system. I believe in the family unit.
Sure.
And
likewise.
High time, hard work and thrift.
Yeah.
And I might not always display that, but I have those, and that's how I was raised, and that's what I believe in.
Yeah.
But has nothing to do with libertarianism.
Yeah.
Like, I separate those, and that's why I consider myself a centrist libertarian or anarcho-capitalist, whatever.
Sure, I can see that, and I mean, and it just comes down to the thick versus thin thing too. I think that's a huge part of it. I don't know how to square that exactly, because I think it kind of plays into David Hume's concept of the is-ought gap too. Where how do you judge the facts that you view against your value judgments? And exactly, I think we do have to sort of take a broad scope of philosophy in general and apply it to libertarianism as a school of thought, because I think we have a tendency to get super dogmatic, and I can see why, because there are very basic principles that we believe can make the world a better place. And that's by abiding by the non-aggression principle and applying that to private property ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple things, but there's a long way between the dependency that people have on the state now, and how you get to a world that favors, or at least has some sort of trajectory towards that ideological bent. So yeah, I mean, it's so hard, and I think we all kind of. I always go in and out of that evangelical phase, and I still waver on it all the time. I debate with myself, do I want to keep doing this podcast where it doesn't seem like I'm getting as much listeners as I would like? And, maybe I just should spend my time building my own human capital, working a little harder at work, and, doing more to better myself than try to change other people who, obviously, I think a majority of people, unfortunately, are very receptive to just really dumb populist ideas.
Yeah.
So how do you not have that evangelical view when there are so many people that just have their take wrong?
and you need to correct them.
Yeah, or at least you feel like you do.
Yeah.
And so what can you do, though? You can ask questions and try to lead them to the correct conclusion, I guess, right? I mean, that's the only thing I found to really to really get through to people. And we were talking about recently on the roundtable this candles in the dark method, right?
Yeah.
Of just why don't you explain it? Because I think you can explain it a little better. I get the concept, but you and Dan from Actual Anarchy had an episode about this. So why don't you go ahead and take it over?
Yeah, well, I think that episode, if I remember correctly, is 26 or 29. I can't. There's a lot, but so basically, the Candlesing's parable is the way Larkin Rose explains it is that, well, there's one candle in a dark room, and that's you, and then you light another candle, and that candle will light another one.
Sure.
But essentially, it's trying to get down and find common ground with someone that you're arguing with, and not actually argue with them, is just walk them through the personal logic of what's going on, and get up close and personal, and avoid these abstract debates about my expert versus your expert, or predicting what would happen in the future. Get it on a personal level. And I need to focus whenever I'm talking to someone. I need to actually use this method, but because it's always inspired by, okay, we're talking about, a certain policy, should kids be allowed to hunt? Should the state come in and violently prevent children or parents from letting their kids hunt? And so to take that on its level, and what I usually would say is, okay, you're in a neighborhood of 5 people, and 3 people in your neighborhood want to install streetlights, but the other 2 people don't want to do that. So what would you personally, and I live on the street too, and I'm one of the people that don't want streetlights. What would you do to get me? What would you personally be willing to do to get me to pay for the streetlights that you want and I don't? And would you come to my door with a gun and ask me, and force me to pay you the money that you want? Would you hire personally someone to come to my door and get this money from me that you want? And if I refuse, would you, what would you do? Would you seize my property? Would you put me in a cage? And I think you just kind of drill that home and just keep working on that and illustrating the logic of it, and not predict, and get them to come to that point of cognitive dissonance where hopefully, and you'll never convince someone in one sitting, but what you want to do is plant that mind bomb inside of them so that when they're mulling it over a week later, maybe alone, they'll realize the NAP.
Well, and then if you really push someone on that and you get them to actually say that, yes, I'm comfortable with hiring this firm to use violence to compel you to do things that I think are beneficial,
then you can't convince them.
Well, maybe you could just say to them, well, hey, wait a second. So you think that's the best way to do it? You don't think that there's a better way to approach solving a problem? One lesson that Woods imparted on me recently on one of his episodes, I don't remember which one it was or when it was, but he said something that really struck home with me, which was that the way that we even look to solve problems, looking to the state to solve a problem, just destroys creativity, because we're doing the same thing that we've done for centuries, millennia even, right? I mean, we've used the state to solve all these little behavioral problems that we have in society for as long as human recorded history. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure why we are still so hell-bent, why so many other people are so hell-bent on just using the same method, only changed maybe a little bit, and calling it something different. You're still using this monopolized force on violence. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not really all too much different. Like, was the USSR really super, way different from Nazi Germany? Little nuances, yeah, and they were enemies, but other than that, like, they're still the state, right?
Yeah.
It's just their goals might have been a little different. So, so I guess one thing you could, if you get someone to at least admit that, yes, they accept that as a moral premise, then maybe you could maybe pose to them that perhaps there is a more efficient way to even do that without the whole, coercion involved in making it a voluntary arrangement. And I think that we have the answer to that in an economic sense.
Yeah.
So that's really where it comes down to as well, is we believe that counter economics and free markets can replace the services that the state have maintained the market on, more or less. And that's the way I see it, right? The world's already anarchistic. It's just this group of people has maintained a monopoly and has asserted its dominance. They're the gang that dressed the nicest. They're the gang that gained the most favors. And if you look at any crime syndicate throughout history in every part of the world, they do things for people, and that's why they have support. So to me, the government was just the one that came out on top on that game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And this kind of gets into before we hit the record button, you were talking about the Matrix.
Yeah.
And what you meant by that was, once you realize what the state is, that you can't unsee it. So if we can get more people to at least see what the state is, and that's why it's so hard to get along with some minarchists, because
they know what the state is.
You'd think they do, but when you push them, I don't think they agree with us that it's a gang. I think if you're lucky, you might get one of these constitutional conservative types that will admit to you that it's a necessary evil, but you're at least getting out of them that it's an evil, right?
Yeah.
And those people I can at least work with. But the people who are like, in this idolatry of the founding fathers, right? And here's what's so fucked up about the history of America is constitutional conservatives view the Constitution as this like ultimate document that's supposed to be the harbinger of freedom, but it was used and amended to enslave a certain group of people.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but I don't even care on this particular point about getting worried about virtue signaling, but racism is unfortunately like part of the history of America, and that's where perhaps there is a little bit of validity in what some progressives have said. But then again, if you know the history of progressivism, they're the ones that put them there, as we've been talking about. Yeah. I mean, and man, you can really see the wheels turning on someone when you can bring up the
Margaret
history.
Sanger and the
yes.
Woodrow Wilson.
So if you can get like a progressive to realize the history of the movement that they're involved in, that it's directly contrary to the goals which the modern movement states, and you can do this to conservatives too, can't you? I mean, just look at how the Constitution itself, going back to that, has been perversed into this tool for the state.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
it always was, I think, a tool of the state. Not to jump in, but like freaking, if you look at the arguments of the anti-federalists, they're the real libertarians. The Constitution was an enslavement document. It was a coup, in my opinion. And I've done some work on this, but that's what it was. You had you had an association of free voluntary states, and then you bound them together in a unleavable, a permanent union that and you tricked them. And people like Patrick Henry said this about the Constitution. That is bullshit, and it just destroyed the revolution, in my opinion. And Prof. CJ, what he really illuminated to me was that the founding fathers are just the new oligarchs. It's not that some of them maybe kind of believed in freedom, but they knew that in advocating freedom, they would be the new rulers of the United States and not have the British rulers be the
Right.
United States.
And that's the complicated thing about it too, is squaring history with how we see the world and how we see private property ethics. Because would you have rather the British Empire won? Because I don't know that I would. You know, what would the world look like? It might be even worse than it is today. But you can't really play speculative fiction with history and be taken seriously. I mean, it just is what it is. That is history. But I fall into this too with just like the whole World War I to World War II thing, Woodrow Wilson getting involved in the Treaty of Versailles. I play speculative history all the time, so I guess I can't really, get too judgmental about it. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard because the French helped the American helped the drunken peasants in America to push back the British
drunken
Empire, right?
Smugglers.
So the argument is that they needed a federal government to repay the French government for assisting us. But I guess the way that I see it, that again, going back to why I talked about David Hume's is ought gap, just because we've solved these problems with the state in the past doesn't mean that that's the way it has to be going forward in the future. So I just hope that we could, at the very least, get people to like we were talking about, just see the evil of the state and hopefully overcome that and make it obsolete through replacing it through superior methods, really.
Well, and that's kind of what I talk about in my paper that was published in Front Range Voluntarist. I didn't
about
say
domestic violence, you're saying?
Yeah. So I guess my thesis statement is that because I actually take the paper from a feminist perspective, because what is the biggest driver of the anti-domestic violence movement? Is feminists.
Yeah.
And they're the whole time. But the thing with feminism is that it started as a grassroots non-state thing, and I kind of document that. And because the feminists see the state as the traditional enforcer of the patriarchy, in quotes, and they did before, but then you get everyone wanting the state to come in and protect people. So the state would not offer relief to abused victims.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they started to get involved with the state. But traditionally that was, and the feminists will say that is the big question. Do we get involved with the state? Because there's feminists that never wanted that. And so then I kind of talk about, the law behind it and how police have no duty to protect you, and they have qualified immunity, and they're immune from market forces and all the good stuff that we know as Austrians. And but at the end, my thesis is that, look, this is where people like the Detroit Threat Management can step in. Domestic abuse is a huge problem. And when I was a PD, I saw a lot of domestic abuse cases and the state getting involved in fucking things up and making everything worse, putting in DANCOs where domestic abuse no contact orders where they were not wanted, and situations like that. And I am just saying that this is a problem that has been solved in Detroit with the Detroit Threat Management Center. So I detail that, and I guess my thesis is that what we really need in the libertarian movement are very ambitious entrepreneur activists. We need people that need to come up with revolutionary business models. And I guess you could get in and say cryptocurrency is kind of, maybe, I'm not a fan of the cryptos personally, but
I'm skeptical at least.
Yes. But what we need to do is that, we're never going to win hearts and minds, or enough hearts and minds to kind of flip everything around. You don't even have to do that if you come up with the superior business model. Lefties know that Uber is better than taxi companies, and
Some of them.
yeah, some of them do.
Did you see it? Bernie during the election was saying that that basically we need to put Uber under the medallion systems.
Oh my God.
It's something at least like that they're compliant with that infrastructure, that market infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, anyway,
Didn't mean to derail you.
Well, no. And I was just, so when it comes to things like private policing, we need ambitious and brave, courageous entrepreneurs to start these private security companies and do better. Commander Dale Brown, the guy who runs it, hero, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
He went out there and he saw bad things and he created a business, and now it's working, and they are very successful over there from what I've seen.
Yeah, and they provide security services to like companies, you know, with plenty of capital, and then you know this by now, but for the viewers, they provide free services to women who are victims of domestic violence. And yeah, that's a heroic thing. Yeah. That is awesome that someone is doing that. And you're totally right. We definitely need entrepreneurs to be bold and to do things that challenge the state.
Yeah.
The unfortunate thing is that because it's like the whole dynamic of welfare, people aren't going to help with charity as much if there's that psychological like phenomenon that someone else is taking care of it, so you don't have to. And I already pay taxes for that thing, so why would I risk my investment in the market on something that's already provided and might be insolvent? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, he took a risk by, you know, I don't know if it's even a risk. Like, he's just a good businessman, and even if it's just good PR for him that he does the domestic violence thing, that's still a good thing. Even if it's just for a profit motive to help get him PR for his company. And I just don't see that as a bad thing if that were the case.
No,
you know?
not at
because
all.
That's the only other argument you can make. Oh, well, that's just PR. So the hell what?
Yeah.
I don't care.
It still helps people. The end result is the same.
Right.
You know, women are getting protection and preventative services as opposed to reactive services that you get from the police if they show up, you know, and them imposing dankos that you don't want. Well, let me just hire the security guy that will, you know, de-escalate the situation if this psycho comes after me.
Right.
And you know,
and when you call the cops, like, what's gonna happen? I mean, worst case scenario, they come and shoot your husband, and that's that's gonna be a complicated thing, because domestic violence, I'm sure you know from researching it, man, it's just such a hard thing to even talk about, because these women, they feel dependent on their abuser, and it's just so shitty that people even do that to each other.
Yeah.
Like, and man, they're victims who are, you know, they're victims of both the violence committed by their abuser, and then the state just comes in and either they'll escalate the situation and someone's going to end up getting hurt or killed. And at best, what they do is they arrest the guy, put him in jail for the night, and then he just goes back to his home with his wife. And, you know, I don't think there's a state solution to it, unfortunately. The only thing that you can do is remediate the situation and stop someone from being victimized as it's happening, which is exactly what the Detroit Threat Management Center is doing.
Yeah, or to prevent it even, you know. But, well, then you get into the incarceration, and me being, I guess, maybe this is a thick thing, me being a conservative, I believe in the family structure. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't care if, you know, 2 men and women, or 2 men, 2 women, don't care. But just that group, the building blocks, and my wife's family is LDS, and they're one of their, you know, all things aside, one of their core tenets is the family and eternal families, and the idea that the family is together forever, and that the family and not the church is the building block of society.
Wow.
And
I guess I didn't realize that about Mormonism.
Yeah.
That's that's cool. There are a lot of things I'm skeptical of with Mormonism. But wow, I didn't know that. That's
they believe the family is eternally together, and that why I'm not as super, you know, I don't know everything about it, but from what I understand, they believe the family is together forever and through all eternity. And I think that's beautiful, you know, from
I mean, spirituality aside, I'm an atheist, but I mean, as far as things are concerned, I'd rather have someone have this mythological and theological view of how they view their family unit and their afterlife than I would just like the benevolence of the state, or even the benevolence of their church, because churches can do some pretty bad shit too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And well, you get people getting arrested anyways, and you know, they're absent from the family, and I don't know if they're an abusive piece of crap, you know.
Right. And I don't know if it's just as simple as any domestic violence call that is taken is a symptom of a pattern of abuse. Maybe husband and wife were just fighting about something and it just got out of hand one time. We all have interpersonal relationship problems, you know, and unless someone has some like major mental problems, then it's usually going to, kind of remediate itself, as long as, you know, people don't get too uptight and hurt each other or anything like that.
Well,
but yeah, man, it's a complicated thing, and the state
Yeah.
doesn't make it better. I think is the long and the short of it.
Well, and it's a one size all fit solution. One size fits all solution. So
Yep.
But did you want to get into the PD stuff or just because you have
Police department
or the public defender?
Oh,
I always think that all the acronyms.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I guess for listeners, my experience, I used to live in Iowa, and they're really hard on drugs there. So I was arrested 5 times total, just for minor drug offenses. And what's strange about this is kind of a small community. Neighboring city is about 30,000 people roughly. The town I lived in was a tourist community, be about 4,000 during the winter and about like twice or 3 times that during the summer. So they have heavy drug enforcement just because of the whole tourist dynamic of the city. And because it's like they apply the broken window policing because it's a tourist community and they want it to be all yuppie and nice looking, but really there's a pretty dark underbelly to the town. But anyway, I was arrested once when I was a kid, put on probation a couple times for infractions on that, and I actually had the same public defender at one point when I was an adult getting arrested as my father. Now, my father is in prison for manufacturing meth. So I mean, he wasn't being a good guy or anything. And that's just the thing about the drug war is there's really no good guy in it a lot of times. But anyway, he had a public defender, and the public defender didn't file the paperwork to run his state time concurrent with his federal time. So basic clerical error that made him sit in prison for a little while longer, perhaps. I mean, it delayed his release into the halfway house. I think they did end up giving him the time served in state because you get double your state time towards your federal time. Actually, they take like if you spend 1.5 years in state, then they'll give you 3 years off your federal sentence. So I think in total he spent like 13 years in prison. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's just the kind of like failure in the system is that we have this monopolized court system, and then the prosecutor has all the power because the norm now is taking a plea deal because pretty much anybody who's arrested for a minor offense isn't going to have the money. I mean, think about it. The people who get arrested for drugs are poor people who use drugs. They're not going to have the ability to fight an unjust law. And this is another point of contention where I just don't see a union with the right. Is they don't think that that's a problem. They think that it's not anybody else's fault that poor people can't get a lawyer to defend themselves. And so yeah, I mean that's just kind of frustrating. But yeah, I mean they're inept. They're guaranteed a job by the state because they're gonna keep getting clients in no matter what. But yeah, I mean, it's another one of those things where do you square your principles with how the world actually works? Because it's probably good that there's some sort of structure set up where there's like a check against the court where someone's defending the person being charged with a crime of the commons, whatever, they consider when the state charges an individual for a non-crime. So basically, I don't know. It's almost worse to me because there is no market demand for defending criminals outside of the state now. So now you just have these public defenders who are inept and are unable to actually defend them, and they just tell them to take a plea deal and never take it to court anyway. So I guess I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because you've been involved in this too. You're in the legal world.
Yeah. Well, I think from the so last year I had all semester I was doing arraignment hearings. And then fall semester and then spring, I was doing the same thing, just in a different jurisdiction. And mostly what I saw I didn't see the trial process or further down the road, but mostly what I saw was people being overworked. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that PDs are bad, and I totally get that, they're inept. A lot of it is overwork. And there's no incentive.
Yeah, so
really
they just
to
have
care
to churn
too
their
much.
cases. And, yeah.
But we stayed ethical.
Yeah. And
but that being said, there was pressure to plea, and it wasn't always.
I don't even know if it's the public defender's fault, though. I don't want to come off as like crass and or anything about people who are in the system. It's just the system itself. That it's the economic incentives that are baked into it that just don't it doesn't defend them.
I totally get what you're saying. And
anyway, go ahead.
But I agree, there are PDs that are inept for sure, but my experience was that people would plea to things because the court system was so slow and onerous that they had to, or they felt like they just wanted to be done, man.
Oh, sure. Because if you take it to trial, you're probably sitting, 2 years before the thing is completely finished, if you're lucky?
Depending on what it is, But
and what state you're in and jurisdiction.
So we never, our rule, of course, was if you are not guilty or think you're not guilty, we're not going to plead you out. I mean, and that was upheld when I was there. But you would get instances where, like, a specific case I had in mind was a guy who got 2 noise complaints, and they were both fucking misdemeanors. And it was $300 fine each. And they said, all right, if you don't take this plea deal now, at your next court appearance, we're going to slap another charge on it and and it will be off the table. So it was 2 noise complaints, and the plea deal was to plead to 1. And they were misdemeanors. And they said, if you don't take this deal now, when you come back, we're going to slap another charge of disorderly on it or something like that and hit you with both the misdemeanors. And so the guy wanted to fight it, but he's like, well, shit, if I don't take it. And it's stuff like that. And that was an extreme case, but all I saw was because Minnesota criminalizes moving offenses, more so registration fees, stuff like that. I'd say a good 2/5 of the people that we saw in court and represented were slapped with driving offenses.
Wow.
And just tiny stuff. And then 2/5 driving offenses, maybe 1/5 drugs, 1/5 domestics.
Okay.
And another is misdemeanor theft.
Sure.
And I have no problem, with the thefts, but what it's caused by is their economic situation.
Yeah, a lot of times I'd say that's true.
Yeah. And just every single morning in the venue, there were 70 lines on the calendar, and that could be 60 people, but 70 lines on the calendar, and it's a mill. People come in, people go out. All right, next. And there's no. And then going from this to last summer, I had an externship and I saw what it was like in a small town. People in small towns have so much more due process than people do here. It's ridiculous. And it's not perfect still in small towns, but to have this mill-like situation in the Twin Cities, just people in, people out. That's what it is.
Well, as someone who was in the court systems in a small community, they ran it like that too. I mean, we just didn't have such a high volume, I guess. But there's still that element to it where the magistrate just sits up there, browbeats you a little bit, tells you what, I'm just talking about arraignments where they're just milling people in. But I mean, the entire system is set up for the plea deals, though. That's what, it just all circles back to that. And I don't know if you agree with me on this, but plea deals just put power into the hands of the prosecutor and takes it completely out of the jury and judge.
Yeah.
So essentially that tool is allowed for autonomy in the court system, and there's no sort of, people like to believe that there's a myth of democracy in America, and I mean, right down to dispute resolution, there's no sort of democratic process for it. So the way I see it, on principle and on philosophy, that if we're not democratic, then we might as well just completely scrap it all.
Yeah.
So anyway, a little tangential, but
no, but I want to pick at you though, because there's this obsession with democracy in the United States, and we never were a democracy. It's always been a republic or there's this obsession. And I don't mean to pick on you, but there's this obsession in the United States with democracy being an end of itself. And I don't understand, looking at the founding documents and studying the Constitution, Ben Franklin said that we're a republic if you can keep it, and we're an oligarchy, obviously. But but there is this sense of democracy being an end of itself, and I understand what do you think? But
well, I was I don't want to be misunderstood, because I was just trying to frame it as if and I should have probably qualified this, if you believe in democracy, this isn't working like democracy, so why don't we just scrap it? I guess I didn't mean to imply that I'm a huge fan of it, but I guess in an abstract sense I kind of am, because the market is the ultimate democratic
you're right.
force. But I guess it's just a misnomer to call it democracy. The market is just capitalism. It's the apparatus of cooperation, really.
Yeah.
So, and really for me, when I really break it down for people, here's what I tell them is like, I just trust the market because it actually has to respond to mistakes.
Yeah.
Whereas the state just simply doesn't. Yeah. It just gets to go on. That has the same amount of contracts and same support that it always had. There's no feedback mechanism that's reliable. People say that there kind of is within like voting and, all of these sort of supposed checks on government, but I'm just not buying it because the history isn't really lining up. From what I can tell, at least. And I have yet to be reconvinced that we need a massive state to watch over us. It kind of gets back to the Matrix thing. Yeah. You never, after you see it, you just can't unsee it, man.
Yeah. That humans are just livestock, essentially. When I had that bing moment was through Stefan Molyneux. Yeah. Obviously, he's kind of taking that alt-right or alt-light or bordertarian path,
you want to call it,
Trump, whatever. But I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but his History of Your Enslavement video on YouTube, just the idea that humans are really just a battery, like the Matrix, that we're being milked. And we're all,
and your labor is directed to help the state and its corporate cronies, mostly, for the most part.
And so that's why I think the Matrix is an allegory for anarchism. It is just saying, okay, all you are is just a battery. And just seeing that, I can't unsee it. And I think there's so much truth to that statement. And I wanted to apologize, though, for the democracy thing. But it's because it's like one thing I hate about libertarians is that semantics. Like, have you ever on Twitter, you've gotten into this conversation where you've said something and that the other person knows what you're trying to get at, but they'll be like, you used the wrong fucking word, man.
Special pleading, sure. Yeah. And that's just the norm anymore, unfortunately, is just people just quibble about the littlest things to avoid the big philosophical and moral implications, whatever you want to call it. Just, how we deal with problems and how we solve conflicts. That's really what it comes down to, I think, for everybody. And this is the thing is, I feel like everybody should be receptive to that. It's just that people are so afraid of the absence of the state that they refuse to even see or admit to some of the problems with it that we have right now. And a lot of the things that people worry about with anarchism are happening right now, which is why I always say we live in an anarchist world. I mean, I'll have to link this on the show notes, and I've posted this on the Facebook page for Subversion, but a video by Brent Venat from School Sucks podcast. Are you familiar with that show?
No, but I should be.
It's awesome. Yeah. And he's got this cool 15-minute video where it's satirical, and he's explaining how he used to be a libertarian, and libertarians are just crazy and see the world through this completely warped prism, and what would we do without the state? We'd have these gangs of people just running roughshod over people and stealing their stuff. And he's like, yeah, but if we got rid of the state, you'd see an influx of crime. We can't deal with that, right? And then he's like, well, but wait, wouldn't you end up with an equilibrium because people would start solving problems on a really local level, and it wouldn't be this top-down statutory thing? And he's like, basically at the end of the video, it comes down to, oh shit, all of these problems that people are worried about with anarchy are happening right fucking now. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. We should probably wrap up, man. We've been on the mic for like over an hour now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Hour and 20 minutes. So I think our listeners will get a little fed up
antsy
with us.
No, but so maybe I'll leave it with this. But the thing with anarchy is that once the state is gone, you actually have to take fucking responsibility for your own choices. And that's what people don't want to do. We're just a culture of victims and people who have no control or, you know, responsibility for their actions. But
yeah, and the state is just a false sense of security that you know, and sometimes, you know, I guess before we sign off, there was one note that we didn't get to, and this is a good time to introduce it, is you were talking about, we won't get into details, but you were talking to someone who's essentially saying that, well, you can't hate like everything the state does because the state does some good things, right?
yeah,
And it's not even necessarily that we don't like anything the state does, because they're obviously like when they solve a murder case and bring someone to justice, even if it's not in the purview of restitution versus retribution that I would personally like to see a court system that only sought damages for property rights violations rather than just locking people in a cage because we think they're dangerous, which I can understand the impulse, but leave it aside for a minute. So essentially, yeah, I think I agree to some really like basic principle in what that person was saying is that, yeah, the state it's not even that we necessarily think that those things shouldn't be solved.
yeah,
It just goes back to Bastiat's, you know, the distinction between society and government is really blurred by this socialist predilection to have things solved by the state. And the quote, I'm butchering it, but in the end, he says, it's almost like people would think that you wouldn't want people to have food because you don't want the state to raise grain.
yeah.
So, and I just don't see how that principle doesn't apply to core services, and even maybe those are the most important ones to privatize.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we don't trust the state to grow food for people because
You end up with shortages.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you get into the 4 Pest campaign and stuff too, do you know about that?
No, I don't.
When we get off the mic, I'll tell you all about it over a big capitalist lunch. We'll have plenty of food, and we'll talk about all the starving people in communist China.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, well, man, this was really fun. Hopefully we'll find time to do this again sometime, and maybe we can, you know, make kind of a regular thing out of it or something.
Yeah, I'd be down, definitely. But we got the video, so for audio listeners of the podcast only.
I've neglected that the whole time.
Yeah.
Hi, video watchers.
But for audio only listeners of the podcast, check it out on my libertyweekly.net. I don't know what the episode number will be. I think it's 49, so /49 or something. But the video will also be embedded in the webpage. So
awesome.
And also at Subversion.
Yes, you can find my show at subversionwebcast.com. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/subversionwebcast. And anywhere you find podcasts, because I'm mostly audio. I'm trying to get hip with the times and get into video. I'm just reluctant to do it.
Got to get a face out there in 2018. But,
right. So anyway, thanks to Liberty Weekly and Subversion listeners. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Peace.